G'day guys, KennyRaceBoy here, and today I'm in the garage again. Yes, changing out more parts. I know it's getting a bit crazy, but today I'm going to be doing a sprocket and a chain. So I'm going to do a bit of an instructional video and show you guys how to do that. And I've been meaning to do it for a while, so it's going to get done. I've done about 30,000. I know it's been a while. So yeah, in one of the last videos somebody suggested that I'd show the tools that I used, so that'll be the next video, being that I don't know if you can see my garage is pretty dirty at the moment and untidy, so with university on and that kind of stuff, it's a bit hard to clean it up and show you guys, but I'm going to quickly do this and show you how to do it. So let's get to it, shall we? So as you can see here, the chain and sprocket on my bike quite worn. They've been on there for about 30,000 kilometers, so it's well overdue for a change. So to do this repair, we're going to need our sprockets. I've got a front and rear here, and also your chain. Probably most importantly, this one here is a DID 520, and it is the VX2 model. And moving on to tools, you're going to need your standard complement of normal tools, and then also specialty tools wise, we're going to need a chain breaker, torque wrench, and probably a pair of pliers as well. So as you can see, difficulty on this one here is set to mechanic, so if you don't know what you're doing, probably leave it to somebody who does. Now with all that out of the way, let's get to it, shall we? Just one quick note before we get started: if you're planning on replacing the front sprocket on your motorcycle, it is probably best to do that before you do this procedure. I already have a video on that how to on my YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description and at the end of this video. So first thing we're going to do is remove that retaining pin from the rear axle nut. Just use your pair of pliers and you can pull it out. As you can see here, mine is actually broken, so I had to replace mine. You may have to do the same. After that, you can go ahead and use your 27mm and breaker bar to release that nut. It is pretty tight. I had to put a fair bit of pressure in there, and eventually what will happen is this. Remove the nut completely along with its washer behind, and then we can proceed to tap the axle out. Using either a block of wood or preferably a rubber mallet, you can remove that axle out of the rear wheel. This may take a little bit of force, but eventually it will come out. So once you've gotten that out, you can proceed to remove the chain from the rear sprocket. Place it off to one side, of course, and then what we can do is we can roll the wheel back. Just make sure to hold on to that rear caliper because it will fall out if you're not careful. Once you've got that rear wheel out, you can proceed to place the caliper and its hold back onto the swing arm. So after you've done that, we can replace the rear sprocket. Either lean your wheel up onto the wall or put it on a wooden stand like I have so you don't damage that rotor, and then we can proceed to unbolt this rear sprocket. The nuts on this sprocket are done up fairly tight and they will take a bit of force, so just be careful when you're undoing them not to hit your knuckles on the teeth, because that will cause a pretty good injury. So always working in a cross-directional pattern, undo those bolts, and then we can proceed to put the new one back on. So with the new sprocket on there, you can proceed to thread the old nuts back onto there, and there's no real need to put any kind of Loctite on there as they are nylock nuts. So once you've tightened all those nuts down, you can proceed to torque them to 32 Newton meters, which is approximately 24 foot-pounds, sure to work in a cross-directional pattern. So after that, we can proceed to remove the chain. So remove this front plastic cover here first. It's held in by 3 bolts. You probably would have done this already if you'd replaced the front sprocket. Once that's done, we can get on to cutting the chain. We're going to use the pin extractor tool on your chain breaker, and what we're going to do is we're going to place it over the pin and we're going to push that rod through it. Once you've successfully pushed one of the pins out of your chain, you can proceed to remove the chain breaker tool and your chain should come apart. As you can see, one of the pins in my chain is pretty well hatted, rusty and very deformed. So pull the chain apart and you should be able to remove it.
Simply click your bike into neutral and you should be able to roll the chain back through the swing arm and off of the bike. Of course, it's now time to put your rear wheel back in. Just make sure you hold onto that rear caliper so you don't drop it or anything. Don't want to put any undue stress on the hoses. So just slide it back out and you can proceed to roll the wheel in and place the caliper over your rotor. Once you've got everything nice and seated, you can proceed to put that rear axle back in. Lift the wheel up with your foot, make sure you have an adequate amount of grease on that axle and proceed to tap it through till it gets to the other side. Finish reassembling the rear axle, putting the push plate, washer and nut back on, and then just make sure they're all nice and snug. Once you've got everything assembled, just make sure it all flows nice and freely. Nearly done now. All we have to do is put the new chain onto the bike, just threading it over the rear sprocket and through the frame. Just be careful not to catch your fingers on anything because those teeth are pretty sharp. Now after you've done that, what we want to do is reset those chain tensioners. Unscrew all the nuts and bolts and reset them back to 0. 0 being set when the push plate's lip is lined up with that furthest notch. Repeat the same set on the other side, and then what you can do is tighten that axle nut up nice and snug so it doesn't move around. Next step is to cut the chain to length. You may or may not have to cut your chain depending on how long your bike is, but essentially what you want to have is a tight chain when your tension meter is set to 0 and 2 female ends on the end of each of the chain. With everything cut to length, you can proceed to put the pin plate through the back of the chain, making sure to put a liberal amount of grease on it, of course. Make sure you've got 2 rubber O-rings or X-rings, depending on what type of chain you have, onto the plate before you put it through. Grease up those 2 pins and you can proceed to place it into the chain. Apply a second amount of grease to the outer pins and then you can proceed to put O-rings or X-rings onto the outer as well. And with one last round of grease you can proceed to apply that to the outer plate and then sit it onto the outer pins. After that, next step is to push that plate down onto the pins. You're going to use your chain breaker tool again, but this time using the push plates. Just wrench down the tool until it begins to push down on the plate. Just be careful when pushing the plate down onto the chain because you can go a little bit too far. The way to double check whether or not you've gone too far is to get the finishing clip, which is this guy, and double check this spacing on the pins. So as you can see, mine haven't been pushed down enough, so I am proceeding to push them a little bit further in. Now the next step would be to put that retaining clip on. All you have to do is place it on. Now they are directional. Basically the way to tell would be to, of course, double check the package that it came in, but generally speaking the direction would be the open end should face backwards when driving forward. Now double check any pins that you have put in or removed, being that sometimes you can create stiff links. Just double check them like I am here. One of the last steps would be to replace the sprocket cover back onto the bike. Apply some blue Loctite to the 3 bolts that came out of the cover and do them up nice and snug so they do not vibrate out. Last but not least would be to tighten your chain, so drop it onto the side stand. And I do actually have a pretty detailed instructional on how to do this in a different video, so I'll link that at the end of the video and in the description. And that's pretty much all there is to it, guys. Congratulations, you've successfully changed your chain and sprockets. Enjoy your ride.